So let's get started. Strategies to support remote learning along continuum of internet access. Welcome. We're thrilled to have so many people here. I'll start by providing a brief overview. First, a little bit about REL Central. So we are one of 10 regional education labs around the country that is funded by the U.S. Department of Education's Institute for Education Sciences. We conduct applied research and provide technical support to our regions, which in REL Central, that includes the states of Wyoming, Colorado, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. But today we're thrilled to be joined by people throughout the country. So our presenters today, my name is Douglas Gagnon. I'm a senior researcher at Marzano Research, and that's where we host REL Central. And I'm joined today by Morris Lyon. Welcome, Morris. He is a superintendent at Hawkins Independent School District in Hawkins, Texas.
Hello, everyone.
And we're also joined by Andrew Moore, who is the Chief Information Officer at Boulder Valley School District in Colorado. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, everyone.
So, if you'll permit me, let me set the stage a little bit. We'll be discussing strategies about connecting with students here in this age of school closures, and a wide array of strategies is being employed by districts across the country. This is due, at least in part, to the tremendous variability in access to high-speed broadband in this country. So this map here shows the percentage of students in districts in the United States that are lacking broadband access. So it's very evident that it ranges from no access to essentially complete access to every shade in between. And also evident from this map is that rural places are much more likely to lack access. So this map is really underscoring the very different starting points that districts have as they are implementing remote learning at scale right now. So obviously because of this, there's a range of strategies that are really falling across the spectrum from fully online to some combination of online and offline activities to purely offline activities and trying to engage students in remote learning right now. Here we see a resource that REL Central has put together. This is around what we consider kind of the four pillars of supporting remote learning: infrastructure, instructional supports, student supports, and then parent and guardian engagement. And this is related to the poll question that we asked you to complete. What do you see as the biggest challenge? So the results are being shared right now. And it looks like it's a pretty even split. About a third of you noted that infrastructure is probably the biggest challenge, but about a quarter noted instructional supports. Looks like about a fifth for student supports and parent guardian supports. And I'm sure there's about 8% in the other bucket. So sure, there are probably a lot of things that don't neatly fall in these categories. So this resource here, we're linking it right now in the chat box. You can click on it and download it for yourself. It'll also be shared with the recording of this webinar when it's made available. So hopefully this provides a brief sense, a concise sense of what is going on there, what the landscape looks like. Just note that this is by no means exhaustive, and I'm sure there are many other things being employed by creative educators around there, but hopefully it's a starting point that's useful in some way. So with that, I think we can jump into our conversation here. So bridging the digital divide. Let's begin our Q&A, our quick chat process here with Morris and Andrew. So we'll start by discussing infrastructure, and I'll point this question at Andrew. Andrew, what is happening in Boulder Valley, and what infrastructure are you using in your district to deliver remote learning? I think you might be muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, great, thanks. First, let me just say, for those that don't know about the school district in Boulder, Colorado, we serve about 30,000 students, not only in the city of Boulder, but the suburbs as well. And that includes the rural mountains just to the west of us. So we have a little bit of diversity in that we've got a pretty dense urban core around Boulder, but then we go out to the suburbs where it would be a traditional suburb type neighborhood. And then we go out up into the mountains where it becomes rural and connectivity becomes much more challenging. So for remote learning, we've been working diligently over the last 3 weeks to get those students connected that don't have internet for whatever reason. And we've been using primarily 4 different methods to do that. Comcast Internet Essentials, which is their $9.95 for qualifying students. We actually signed a contract with Comcast so that the district could pick up the cost for those students that couldn't afford, or the families of those students that couldn't afford internet. So that took a portion of the connections. Second to that was hotspots. So we procured both T-Mobile and Verizon hotspots, and we were able to deploy those to students who were in their coverage areas. Although many of you may have already run into the same problem we did, coverage is often poor in those areas where you need connectivity. And that's just the laws of supply and demand and the coverage areas that the cell phone providers have. We also went down a path of doing a public-private partnership, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, but we have a program we've been piloting for 2 years called Connect Me, or Connect My Education, and it's with a company called Livewire. Livewire provides over-the-air broadband services. They're a competitor to CenturyLink, Comcast in our area. The agreement that the Board of Education just signed this week was to expand it district-wide. And long story short, they put their antennas on our schools, and then they have about a 2 to 3 mile radius off of each school where they could provide broadband. In the agreement with this company, they're obligated to provide free internet to any qualifying student. So during the pilot, we had about 50 students hooked up, and we are now starting to roll out more students on their infrastructure. So that's been one of the, I think, saviors for us. And then I said there are 4 ways for us to solve that problem. Up in the mountains, where it's been a bigger challenge, there are literally some places that there is no internet. It simply does not exist at the homes. So we're installing external wireless access points on the 2 schools we have in the mountains. And it'll be a place where those families can come in and drive in, basically, and get high-speed internet. We're fortunate that we have our own fiber going from Boulder up the 25 miles in the canyon up to where those schools are located. So there's fast internet at those schools.
Thanks, Andrew. And just a reminder to participants, if you do have a question, to plug it into the QA box. Morris, let me turn the question to you. I know the context in Hawkins is a bit different. Share a bit about what your infrastructure looks like right now.
Yes, we're a small rural school in Texas. We have about 750 students. That's pre-K through 12. So a little bit of contrast to what Andrew has, but we are rural. So in some of that, like Andrew has a challenge, we also have a challenge in some of our areas having the ability to get internet access. Even to the point where cell signal is not usable either. So even if we could get hotspots, if we were able to, they weren't on back order, we still could not receive a signal from many of our kids. So we have a local company in town that has set up a few mobile areas. We have that access here at school, but then throughout the community, some other stations where they can mobile drive up and then have a mobile access there and sit in their cars and work on documents. So we definitely have implemented the hybrid approach. So we've kind of go through this whole continuum that's here on the screen. Research says that the teacher has the greatest impact on student learning. So we certainly are trying to get that to them through internet, or we are using some Zoom platforms with all the securities in place. And so that those students who can't get internet could call in on the phone. I think that it's very important, especially in this time that we're in, that our students hear their teacher's voice. I think it's so important that they have that normalcy and that connection that many of our teachers and students have, that they're able to hear their voice and hear the lesson. So that's kind of, we do have bins at school where we're mailing out packets. We're putting return address packets or envelopes in those packets. We also have the ability for people to drive up on campus and drop in a bin their work. So all those things from the first thing on the spectrum to the last, we're implementing in some measure, because we want to make sure that all of our kids have have that access. So it's kind of a robust way to approach it, but we're trying to do all we can. Even with bus routes, we've delivered some work, but we've moved that to more through the mail so that it limits exposure to in contact, just for our student and staff safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a challenge when you need to really employ so many strategies to make it work. Now's probably a good time for a question. My colleague David Janowski has been monitoring the QA box. David, could you find a question that'd be good to ask Andrew or Morris?
Well, I think Andrew's actually addressing some of these, but one of the first questions that came up, Andrew, could you tell us a little bit more about hotspots? We've heard a lot about those lately, but I'm not sure everyone knows exactly how those work.
Yeah, so the hotspots are primarily provided by the cell phone providers. So AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, and they're a small device that hooks into the cell network, and it creates a wireless network in your house that uses that infrastructure to be able to serve the students. They work really well for one student for sure, two students if you're not streaming video. If you start to get more on one hotspot, the service tends to degrade pretty quickly. I think we hear a lot about 5G. Once 5G is finally deployed, that'll solve a lot of those challenges. You also hear about hotspots in another context. Some of you may know of Xfinity Wi-Fi. It often will pop up on your home network when you're trying to hook a device in, and you may not be an Xfinity Comcast customer and wonder where that's coming from. It's coming from one of your neighbor's houses. What Comcast Xfinity does is when they procure a device in your home, they turn on a public hotspot or SSID in that particular case, but it's locked behind a paywall. So those customers of Comcast can get on. Now Comcast has opened those up, but only around businesses right now. So during this crisis we're going through, if you're near an Xfinity Wi-Fi SSID near a business, you can get onto it for free. I've been lobbying Comcast, trying to get energy for them to open that up, especially in the suburbs where this problem does exist, and they've not been willing to open it up, in the suburbs at this point. I'd encourage all of you to reach out, though, if you believe that might be a bridge opportunity. Reach out to them and ask the same questions that I've been providing or working with them on.
Thanks for that. Now is probably a good time to move on to instructional supports. And this time, Morris, I'll pitch it to you first. What are some of the learning activities or resources that you're using to support students?
Well, the first thing we did when we started out is we set a week for professional development for our teachers to start getting our arms around this to try to figure out what to do. We've set up schedules like many schools have with the way it looks for a week. A teacher would have a general assembly to introduce the work for the week. Then we have different progress monitoring pieces in place. Our teachers have office hours where if a student is struggling or something that needs help, they can call in and get some additional help. And then the teacher will then have follow-up Zooms to try to spiral back into the lesson as we go forward. We use Google Classroom some in high school, but we don't really have an LMS per se across the district. So some of these things we're having to build as we go. But I think the important thing to remember in this process is that quality instructional systems that you have in place are quality instructional systems. I think we don't need to forget that. We need to make sure that we continue to implement those good systems we have in place and just put a pivot on it to try to figure out the delivery. I think some people get boggled into, we've got to create a whole new process or a whole new instructional system. And I think that's not the case. We need to make sure we keep good instruction. I think another point that we've learned through this process, we are actually finishing our 4th week of online instruction. So we've kind of done some resets and some tweaks as we go along. But I think one thing we've got to understand is that we've got to focus on quality and not quantity. I think we've got to make sure that we don't overload with worksheets or things like that, that we don't get into a worksheet packet mentality, that we make sure that we're taking opportunity to use those high yield instructional strategies and those things that we know are good practices, and incorporate that. We also do, our administrators, we do instructional rounds, with many people may be familiar with, and to try to get us in that mindset of normalcy and being familiar with our processes, our administrative team did an instructional round with some of our recorded lessons that our teachers did. And that's not to be, it's just for us to get a hold of, okay, what's working, what's not, how do we need to move this forward, what are things that we can do. But we again use pretty much with instructional supports listed here, pretty much the whole spectrum there. We're kind of a across the board hybrid on that. So all aspects, whether it be audio, recorded lessons, all those things, to try to reach as many kids, since we do have such a diverse landscape that we're trying to approach. So that's basically in a nutshell what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. And just a reminder, as folks are continuing to pump questions into the QA box, we'll probably won't be able to get to all of them. We certainly won't be able to get to all of them right now, but we will afterwards curate a list of FAQs that come from this and distribute it with the recorded webinar and the other resources that we link to. So just encourage you to keep asking questions, because even if it's not answered now, it will hopefully be answered in due time. So now let me turn the question to Andrew. What additional instructional supports are being provided in Boulder?
Yeah, great. I think Morris did a great job, and one thing I'll stress that he said is not doing too much, right? Not being online for 6 hours a day, but making it quality. We are using Google Meet for all of our student teacher video interactions, and we know that's being used heavily to be able to engage the students. And I think there's a real need for the students to feel like there's a connection. In fact, our attendance has been higher in this virtual world than it had been, on any given day, which shows that either kids are really starving for that connection, or maybe they are sick and at home and they're still able to participate where they wouldn't be in the brick and mortar world we've all come from. I'll touch also on our learning management system. It seems like that has become a cornerstone to make sure that students know what they need to do and that they can communicate effectively with their teachers. We use 3 different platforms in our district, Schoology primarily for the secondary levels. When you get into middle school, you kind of see a shift down to Google Classroom, and Google Classroom then shifts also down to elementary. But for the youngest, we also use a product called Seesaw. And regardless of the name of the product, I think what's most important is that those learning management systems allow fluid exchange of information. And that's such an important thing in the virtual world. We're also doing check-ins on students that are not connected. They're, for whatever reason, they're not participating. And that is an ongoing everyday process that happens at the school level. Just trying to figure out what's going on with every single student, all 30,000 of them in our district, to make sure they're not missing something, or they don't have other things going on in their lives that are preventing them from engaging.
Thanks for that, Andrew. David, were you able to find a question to pose? I think you're muted.
The new world for all of us. A question that's coming up a lot is the question about students with IEPs or English language learners, and how we're able to provide the additional supports that are necessary for those particular students.
I'll jump in here. Morris will probably have a little bit more, but my wife also works in the school district, and she's a physical therapist. And so it has been amazing for me to watch her on video conference calls to provide what is normally a physical service to those kids that need physical therapy work. And she's working directly with the students and the parents to coach them across the video and be able to handle that. She also is in IEP meetings, of course, for the students that are on IEPs, that are on her caseload. and they have parents, they've got the principal, they've got the teachers, they've got any of the support personnel, and they're using the same exact technology, Google Meet in our case, to be able to have those meetings real time, as it plays out.
Andrew, we have some commonalities there. My wife works in the special ed world, but she works virtually. So I have definitely tried to listen to her and mine ideas from her as to how we could do this. And again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's just, we've got to just pivot the way we do things and think about what it would look like, as far as brick and mortar, how do we do it, and pivot to virtual. What we've been doing is, we try to implement everything to the level that we can. As you said, some of the therapists and the occupational therapy and things like that are a bit of a challenge. Our state agency, Texas Education Agency, has done a great job of really supporting us with those things. They have a COVID-19 website they set up, and they have a lot of those guidance that they provided with us as far as meeting federal requirements and special ed students. We're still having ours through Zoom and different platforms. We're meeting going forward with that. But our as far as supports, our special ed teachers are, reaching out to our special ed students, and they are trying to help them meet the IEPs as listed to the best of our ability under this circumstance. And they're keeping those logs and documentation of doing that. It's just, it's a challenging time, and we're trying to do everything we can to make sure there's support and for our students during this time. But we're continuing as much as we can with normal activities as possible.
All right. Why don't we move on a bit? The next question was going to be around student supports, but I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and I think some of these were folded in very nicely into this instructional supports. So I think we're going to move on to the next question, and I'll pose this to Morris to kick it off. And that's, how are you looping in parents and guardians and providing support with them during these times?
Well, that's, it's always a challenge to make sure that we're communicating well. But we've stood up a website on our district page that has all of our COVID-19 resources in there. I think that's been helpful. So as we go forth, we're trying to do informational videos. We do our kind of our robocalls, we call them, that we do the phone calls as reminders, mail outs, personal phone calls, even to the point where we have different layers. If we can't get through social media and all those platforms a response, we've even done some very limited amount, of course, using PPE and everything, going out and doing a home visit just to check in to see if there's a possibility that we can help. My principal helped develop that web page on our side, and we've also put in the link. If anyone needs a resource, she's built a model in Google Slides that someone can take and make a copy of, and then use that right into your website. It's been we've got a lot of compliments on it. It's been a very nice site and easy to read and navigate through to get those bullets in there. So, in thinking about now, we're even thinking about registration for next year. What we're going to do this summer, how we're going to do those things going forward, graduation. A lot of those questions are coming up, and we're trying to answer those through that platform, point everybody in that direction. And we developed our whole instructional program. We try to do a fun spin to it. We call it Camp Rock, reaching our community and kids. So on our webpage, we put a rock at hawkinsist.org that parents can have that one source to go to with questions. So that's been very helpful. Just kind of, again, I guess we're a hybrid district. We're doing a little bit of everything to try to reach all platforms.
That's wonderful. Andrew, is there anything different in Boulder that's worth bringing out here?
Yeah, a couple things I'll mention. We're doing a lot of the same communications, of course. From a technology perspective, we've started a service called IT Prime, and we're running 2 vans right now around the district swapping out broken Chromebooks. So if a student has a broken Chromebook, there's a process for them to let us know. we'll go through a process over the phone with them, trying to get it re-established. If that doesn't work, then we're actually coming out and swapping the devices real time. So within 24 hours, we're taking a load off of, let's just say, the anxiety of parents when their children can't get connected. That also brings me to our service desk. We had to retool our service desk, which used to just take calls from teachers, from principals, from staff. And now we take calls from students. We take calls from parents. We'll help troubleshoot networking issues at home. We'll help them if they're struggling with getting a piece of software working. And so we've pulled in our field techs, the ones that are typically at the schools, and we've now put them on the phones, which had its own challenges, but for the most part, we've expanded that service just to be able to answer questions as quickly as possible.
Douglas, a couple other things. We've called our, it may be a sibling or a grandparent or whatever. So we've called our people that are assisting our students learning coaches, and so we've tried to make sure that, again, we've reached out to them, but we're sending out tips for our learning coaches about what are things to do, what are things you don't have to. One of my neighbors talked about, one thing that's important, as you stress, is during the school day we have breaks and schedule changes and recess. We've got to make sure they understand that, hey, you can take a break. If you get frustrated, take a break. I think they need tips, they need information. We're in week 4. Like I said, we're finishing up week 4, fixing to start week 5. Our state agency has told us that, if we're moving forward, our expectation is we teach the standards. So, we've got to make sure that we keep progress, and our progress reports are going out. We are doing grades. Our grading policies are on that site I mentioned earlier. But, we are trying to do grace. We're trying to give grace to our parents because we understand they're working long hours, but just making sure and giving that reassurance and let us know that we're all there. But we do have to set expectations, and we still have to know that we are going back to school and we are having school. So I think that's the thing to stress. But you've got to give some tips and some help and some training to your parents, because it is very stressful, and give some tips about how they can go through this process and make it easier for everyone. I mean, get your kids up, have them take a shower, start the day, get dressed for school. I mean, that's a big start right there. I mean, just things like that will help.
We are running a little late. Hopefully folks can stay on for just a few more minutes. Wonderful. David, is there a little question you could ask now?
Yeah, I actually want to take it off in a slightly different direction. We've had a number of questions about support for teachers and providing professional development for teachers to make them more comfortable in this online environment. So I wondered if you could address that question.
Yeah, we started a daily check-in. So we had professional development, ed tech type individuals that were basically available at a set period of time every day. And at the start, there were lots of teachers calling into that. And then it quickly dropped off. And so we're no longer doing that on a daily basis. I think the kind of organic networks start to form where the teachers start to know the other teachers that have really got this down, and they start to reach out one-on-one. And so we're fortunate that we've got a good supportive staff where we rely on each other.
Our principals are doing staff meetings via Zoom. We're even going back to those good quality systems. We're even doing PLCs through Zoom and talking about, as we do our instructional rounds and we see things maybe, then our principals are working at having our PLCs, and we're going through our questions about, in that realm of professional learning communities, about what that means and how this looks, and just trying to apply those same things to this virtual environment, and trying to make sure that we're providing a good instruction to our students in this platform. So again, emails, support, letting them know that we care about them and that we're here for them if they have things, and just checking in regularly with our teachers to ensure that, because they're stressed too. I mean, we've had even power outages here lately, so that layered on top of everything else. So, making sure our people are emotional, supported emotionally, and making sure that they know we care about them, I think is very important during this time.
Right. So one last question. We thought we would end on a positive note by asking what you see as an opportunity that comes with this. And I'd encourage the audience to put their own silver lining hats on and type in the chat box what you see as an opportunity coming out of this. But I will, Andrew, I'll ask you first. What do you see as an important opportunity that will come from this?
Yeah, I think we're reestablishing what normal is. I think historically there's been a lot of pushback in K-12 with remote learning. And now this begs the question, as we all start to get more comfortable with it, could this be a more effective mechanism for some students? It could be because of medical needs. It could be because of emotional needs. It could be just because some students are remote and they have things they need to do, and could they plug into their class using some of these technologies? I think the other thing is, from a staff perspective, we're all learning how to communicate, I think, more effectively using these video tools, and we're getting comfortable with them. And I think a lot of times it's more efficient in the conversations and the meetings that at least we're having. So I think new norms are going to be established as we come out of this pandemic. And some of these learnings, I'm thinking, are probably become part of our culture. The joke this morning was, will there ever be a snow day again?
Yep.
I think that's so true. I think schools are definitely going to be transformed as we go forward. You know, and I'm looking at some of the things in the chat, and I think we have to become more intentional about reaching out and communicating and listening at a deeper level. Because we're not face to face, so that's requiring us to, in relationships being built. And Andrew said it earlier, getting their resources together and their groups that they rely on. I think that's been huge. One of my colleagues I was talking to the other day, we were talking about, you know, when we started this movement, now it's like 20 years ago, about going into the 21st century learning. A lot of us, especially in small schools, some people did better jobs than others, but we put technology in the classroom and said, okay, you know, we're 21st century learning. We got computers in the classroom now, but we didn't, and many of us didn't do a good job of training. And I had someone tell me the other day, this is the best professional development we could ever have because our teachers are immersed in the learning, and they're immersed in using these technologies and things that we've not ever really taken the time to do before. I had one teacher, and I walked down the hall. I mean, we do have some teachers come in because we're rural and they can separate and they can get in their classroom. They may not have internet at home, but so I walked by, I heard someone the other day, and I looked in through the window, and a teacher was in there just teaching his heart out, recording his lesson. And I spoke to him briefly, and he said, you know, this is in a small school where we have so many kids doing so many different things. We can just continue our lesson. I mean, this is, we can proceed with the lesson. Those students that are out, we can have that recorded. And our teachers are seeing that. They're seeing the benefits of these things that are happening during this time, about how they can apply it when we come back. So I think it's just really, we have to look at that silver lining. We have to look at the hope. We have to look at how we can reach our students better. And like you said, the flexibility I saw in here in the chat in high school, and having a flexible schedule. Like I said earlier, staff meetings. We can do staff meetings now in a small school where somebody has duty and things like that. It could be recorded. They can get the message. I think there's just a lot of efficiencies that are going to be able to be used as we go back. And I'm excited about the future. I think it's going to be great.
Well, I thank both of you for finding the positives that are coming out of this very challenging time. Huge thanks to Morris and Andrew for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
And I have just a few things to share with everyone else on the line. This is a place to go for more COVID-related resources that are put out by the Department of Education and the REL network. This should be posted in the chat, and it will also be included in the materials that are sent out afterwards. And you'll also have to, you won't have to, we're asking you to complete a survey. It should pop up when you exit the webinar. And so your comments and feedback here will inform future events and resources. We always love to get feedback from folks, but it's particularly important now, given how quickly the landscape is changing and the new needs are emerging on a pretty constant basis. So that's it. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Be well. Bye.
Thank you.